the history of Western philosophy begins in that area of the world which I hope you recognize as the Aegean Sea, with Greece and Asia Minor. The first known philosopher who's talked about, at least, Thales of Miletus, came from just about that location, in the center of the west coast of the Asia Minor Peninsula. In other words, the Greek colonies scattered around the Aegean. Now, a question that one usually starts with is how do you account, then, for the rise of Western philosophy there in the Aegean area in ancient Greece? And there are several lines of explanation which are important. One is, of course, that it stands at the crossroads between East and West, where traditional ideas would be challenged by the interaction with Eastern culture, simply because of the way in which the trade routes came through Asia Minor and down the Meander Valley. The river Meander meanders down to the sea, so this is the Meander Valley there, and the trade routes come that way. So, all right, cross-cultural stimulation led to the asking of some basic questions. A second thing that is emphasized a great deal, and I think appropriately, is that the early Greek philosophers were really pre-scientific scientists. They were asking questions about the natural world, about the natural order, about the natural processes. They raised questions about basic elements. What basic element or elements underlie all of the rich furniture of the heavens and the earth that we see? What are the causal processes that account for the variation of things and the changes that occur? That sort of question. Early philosophy of nature, primitive cosmology, questions about the origin of the cosmos as we know it began to arise. And you could see how they could be connected with the differences between East and West and the stimulation that comes with the mythology of the two interacting and coming into some degree of conflict. But there is a third feature that is tremendously important, and I think, I've come to think increasingly, of particular importance. The earlier Greek poets, dramatists, had the conviction that the cosmic order, which we observe in nature, is also a moral order. A notion of cosmic justice is something that surfaces among some of those early literary figures. In between the Odyssey and the Iliad, it begins to appear. In Hesiod, it's explicit. In Aeschylus and Sophocles, it's present. So that the question is whether there is an order to the cosmos that includes a moral order. If this is a moral universe, how do we explain that fact? So then we have really two philosophical lines of thought in accounting for the origin of Greek philosophy here. One that focuses simply on reflection about the physical cosmos, and the other about reflection on the moral order, which they believed to exist in the processes of nature. So what I want to do today is to focus on the first of these, their attention to the physical order, and then next time to turn our attention to the moral order. Take a look at that, okay? Now, with that in mind, take a look at the outline that I've just given you of the pre-Socratic philosophers, those prior to Socrates. You notice I've grouped them, where the principal grouping is in terms, you notice, of various kinds of monism, under Romans 1, 2, and 3, as against pluralism. That is to say, the question as to whether there is one basic element that accounts for everything, or whether there are many basic elements. That would be, obviously, a kind of qualitative monism, or pluralism, as the case may be. Qualitative. Is there one basic element? Are there many basic elements? But it also involves a quantitative question, whether the universe is numerically one all-inclusive, solid kind of sphere, or whether there are numerically many distinguishable things. Now that sounds abstruse, for the simple reason that you think you're something different than I am, which implies there are many different things. So with a quantitative monism is going to arise some very fundamental question about the reliability of our sense experience. Because if sense experience tells us we are many in number, but the theory becomes that everything is one in number, there's something wrong either with the theory that everything is one, or else something wrong with our sense experience. So that will arise later on when we get down to the group labeled Eleatics, absolute monism, named Eleatics after Elia, which is in the toe of Italy, where some of these people were. So that quantitative issue arises there. But at the outset, we're dealing in that naive monism of the Milesians with a qualitative pluralism, or qualitative monism. How many basic elements are there? Now, remember, they've never been in the chemistry lecture hall. They've never seen the table of the elements. And impressed as they are by the ordered arrangement of things, the initial tendency is to look for one basic element. And as you read these materials, and I hope you will have read through the primary and secondary materials on the pre-Socratics by the end of this week, as you read these materials, you'll find that Thales thought that everything was ultimately reducible to, derived from, the one element he called water. Now, for the moment, disregard the fact that you don't think it's an element, H2O. He wasn't to know that, poor Thales, you see. It still sounds like rather a wild hypothesis. Everything composed of water? Well, wait a minute. Water is a remarkably adaptable kind of thing. It comes in liquid, solid, and vapor. It is essential to life. Not only to your life and mine, but to vegetation. Notice how brown everything is around here? We've had quite a drought this summer. I think I've mowed my front lawn once since early June. Which is a welcome change, but it's a tragic one. You see. No, water is so fundamental to everything that goes on. That necessity. That understandably, Thales conjectured that maybe this is the basic stuff. Well, he wasn't the only person in the business. And you notice the name of Anaximander, who, because he recognized that you have not only wetness, you have only dryness, you have also dryness, he began to see you have opposing qualities. And the same in other regards. Heat and cold. Light and dark. Male and female. And inasmuch as if you have opposing properties, no one can be more basic than the other, he supposed that the basic element must be something that is undefinable, and that's what the word apeiron means. It cannot be defined. It cannot be delineated, marked off. The Greek word keras means a border, a demarcation line. The alpha privative makes it negative. So apeiron, it has no definition. It's undefinable. Anaximenes, on the other hand, thought that air was the basic essential. And so you begin to get this variety. And what's surfacing, if you're familiar with Greek literature, what's surfacing is the fact that they are playing with the various elements that the Greeks talked about even in their literature. Earth, air, fire, and water. Those are the four classic Greek elements. Some have suggested that they represent the four necessities of life. Earth, food, air, breath, fire, warmth, water, something to drink, nourishes. Earth, air, fire, and water, four necessities of life. But you notice that here we have Anaximenes, here we have Thales. Later on, we'll find Heraclitus and some of the Stoics plugging in on fire. You see? In other words, in terms of the elements as they conceived them, the elements with which they were familiar, which one of these is most basic? Or is it none of these, as Anaximander supposed? Well, the Milesians were asking these rather simple questions. Processes of change, they thought, could be explained in the case of air with condensation, which produces moisture. You see? So there are all sorts of possibilities in these proposals. On the other hand, Pythagoras and Heraclitus. Incidentally, that's the Pythagoras you meet in mathematics. The mathematician that produced what becomes known as Pythagoras' theorem, that the square and the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides. Remember that Pythagoras? Okay. Pythagoras and Heraclitus, seemingly independently of each other, in the late 6th century, that's to say before 500, in the late 6th century, we're saying that there is to nature, as it were, two sides, each of which is equally important. A double aspect theory. Now, you can get perhaps a rough idea of what I mean by double aspect if you consider the question about an object that's almost becoming rare in this culture, a saucer. You know, this is the age of mugs, rather than delicate English china with teacups and saucers. But at least you know the shape of a saucer. Is a saucer concave or convex? Yes. From one point of view, looking down on it from above, it's concave. From the other point of view, looking up at it as somebody carries it along, it's convex. Two aspects to it. So to say that a saucer is both concave and convex is to talk about the double aspect nature of the saucer. Okay. Now, what Pythagoras and Heraclitus are impressed with is that there are two aspects to everything in nature. On the one hand, everything seems to be in a process of change. On the other hand, there is order, what we call uniformity of nature, predictability. You see? Oh yes, to think of that change, Heraclitus suggested that the basic element is like fire. You know, fire is always changing. Have you noticed sitting around a fireplace in the winter, you get sort of mesmerized by the flickering flames that are always changing? You see? It's almost hard to concentrate on reading philosophy around the fire. For that reason. Constant change. You see? Yet, on the other hand, this is an ordered universe. There's regularity. You know how certain kinds of wood will burn, and when they're wet, how they won't. So you have both change and order. Change and order. And Pythagoras and Heraclitus, independently of each other, try to talk about precisely that. The way in which Heraclitus does it is to suggest that what we have is fire, or some fiery vapor, heat rising, steam rising, everything rising and changing and flickering and burning down and so forth. Fire, plus some sort of intelligible, traceable order that he calls logos. Now, you've run across that word before. That's the word that the Apostle John is going to use in the first line of his Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, he's in archein ho logos. In the beginning, the logos. You see. This is where it first begins to appear in Greek thought. And John later adapts a Greek conception in the light of Hebrew conceptions to his purposes. Watch it. Now, on the other hand, Pythagoras, the mathematician, also talks of things changing, and the idea of fiery vapor is something he alludes to. But instead of talking of logos, what he talks about is a kind of mathematical order to things. A mathematical order to things. So that you can represent all sorts of different shapes numerically. You see. This is a mathematical kind of universe, where you can trace out the mathematical order. This is why he was interested in geometry. You see. So you have these two, emphasizing that there is an orderedness to nature for all the processes of change. And, footnote, in anticipation of the theme next time, that means that amidst all of life's change, we should live a rationally ordered life. You see. The ethic arises from this. Well, Pythagoras and Heraclitus. On the other hand, when you get to the Eleatics, they want absolutely no pluralism, no discrimination of two aspects, no will to change. And Parmenides, in very forthright fashion, declares that change is illusory. Plurality is illusory. Physical motion is illusory. The senses are simply the way of illusion. If you want the way of truth, you have to think in abstraction from all of the senses. Think abstractly. And if you want to see more of what is meant by thinking abstractly, well, you can read the Parmenides selections in the Kaufmann Anthology. But give attention to Zeno, because Zeno tried to make the case for this absolute monism by posing paradoxes. Change is a paradoxical, self-contradictory thing that couldn't occur. For instance, take for instance a hare that is chasing a tortoise. Does a hare ever catch the tortoise? No. Because, you see, here is the line along which the tortoise is moving. By the time it gets to there, the hare has gotten that far. By the time the tortoise gets there, the hare gets that far. By the time the tortoise gets there, the hare gets that far. And because the hare keeps advancing, because the tortoise keeps advancing, the hare never catches the tortoise. You see, he's already in it. And that's illusory. You think. Does a chicken ever cross the street? No. Because if this much is the street, then first the chicken halves the distance, H-A-L-V-E-S, halves the distance. Then the chicken halves the remaining distance. Then it halves the remaining distance. Then it halves the remaining distance. Then the remaining, then it never gets across the street. You see. Millet seeds were regarded as the smallest seeds that there are. Millet seeds. Now, to show the paradoxical nature of pluralism, Zeno poses this. How much sound would one millet seed make if you drop it? No sound. All right, drop a sack of 10,000 millet seeds. How much sound will it make? 0 times 10,000, which is zilch. No sound. But you heard the third illusion. Rationally, it's impossible. The way of illusion is the way of the senses. The plurality of things that we see are illusory as plurality. Processes of change and motion are illusory. From a strictly logical standpoint, there can be no change, no plurality. Now, I don't think that there's ever developed a school of thought known as Zenoism or Parmenideism, because those people represent sort of a logical terminus that nobody wants to follow them to. It's one thing to say that the senses are sometimes illusory. It's one thing to say that sense perception is relative and changing. Sure, and we'll find lots of people, Plato and so on and so forth, say that. But to say that they are completely illusory, well, if you say that, why would you say it? To whom would you say it? And why utter any sound in saying it, if that position is correct? Why even record what Zeno and Parmenides said, if that position is correct? It's self-defeating. But the point is, not the position that they came up with, but the kinds of issues they're posing. What does it mean to say that everything is one whole, that this is a universe? Well, presumably it doesn't mean what Parmenides thought it meant. But on the other hand, is this a world of radical pluralism with everything disassociated? Radical individualism in an anarchistic kind of